thing about Trump is he's very transactional, but he's also very much a person who understands bully economics. I don't have a better phrase for it, you know. Yeah, and typically, I mean, when there's a policy shift, nobody wants to announce their loss. So you'll just see.
Yeah, you'll just see all the washing machines do come from China. Yeah, okay.
Fair.
You know, podcasters are starting to rule the world, and there are some that are good and some that are better and some that are just about the best, and I'm joined today by one of them. It's been a long time since we've had him on the show, and that is the one and only Mighti Jamie.
Hey Mike, how are you?
Good, man. Good to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you've got your show, The Dissection. In actual fact, we were talking about it earlier when you were last year. It was before you had launched that particular program. But this is the program for you, and it is doing so well. To any of you that haven't watched The Dissection, I would suggest you give it a watch. Jamie goes deep. He does dissect the issue. He doesn't. He backs up what he says with facts, not like some other podcasters we know. But Jamie, well done, and
thank you.
You know, it shows in the numbers, and we all keep an eye on each other, and I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you
for everybody. Because
I think also the podcast community is growing, which is good. You know, I know politicians sometimes get nervous that, you know, the podcasters are sometimes being more honest about their shenanigans than even mainstream would be. But I'm happy that there's a healthy podcast community. Obviously, there's a broad podcast community because these microphones are sold on Take a Lot and you can just get one. And by virtue of just creating the content, you're now a podcaster. But there is a healthy amount of content being created, I think, with empirical research, with some thoughtfulness that is being applied, which I think is providing a service in a way that, you know, mainstream isn't. And even your channel, you know, has been doing good work. So I think, thank you for you know, giving some props to mine, but I would also like to give props to yours, because I think now there's a healthy ecosystem to follow big topics and get some diverse viewpoints, but still get well-researched viewpoints so that the public can think through some of these things.
Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, this was a meeting of the Mutual Appreciation Society. Thank you so much for
we need that.
For
we need more. We need more in life.
You guys don't give us enough likes. That's our problem. We grow. But Jamie, we've got a couple of really serious issues to tackle. South Africa is in quite a difficult spot. Some of it of our making, some of it not.
Yeah.
This episode of The State of the Nation has been brought to you by Pace Car Rental. We would like to thank Pace Car Rental for sponsoring us, and we want you to support them by hiring your next car through Pace. Go to their website, the address here below, use the code SONA, S-O-N-A, to get a discount. And now back to the show. Now, as we record this, we're about to feel the effects of tariffs from the US. And as you and I know and have reported to about, these were kind of a long way coming.
Yeah.
And our government, asleep at the wheel, knew this was coming, much like they knew Donald Trump had won the election and then decided anyway to send Ibrahim Rasool, like that was a good idea. So they knew he was all about the trade deal and decided to send nobody to speak to him until it was too late.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the bet was probably that Kamala was going to win when they were doing scenario planning and maybe even thinking through some of the policies which got passed towards, you know, the end of the previous administration. Because if you look at the bills which were on the president's desk, right, National Health Insurance, Bella, Expropriation Act, these were not the types of legislation we actually thought would ever get off the president's office, you know, and they got signed. And when they got signed and Trump was now in the administration, it seemed to me that this is not going to work, right? There is going to be some kind of a confrontation between the Americans as well as the South African administration. It seemed inevitable, even if you put aside the Iran and the Israel issues. Just on the basis of those policies, it looked as if the things are going to come to a head. And that's what's happened. And when you then factor in that I don't think we've made an offer, or South Africa made an offer to the Americans that would have stopped the momentum of some of the issues that Donald Trump in particular is concerned about. You think about the use of the dollar as a reserve currency. That's something that Donald Trump fundamentally understands is one of the strengths or the power points of the US economy. And he's not going to let that go. And one thing about Trump is he's very transactional, but he's also very much a person who understands bully economics. I don't have a better phrase for it. You know, the guys who come in and do mergers and acquisitions, the guys who come in and do hostile takeovers, these are the sharks of the economic ocean. These are the sharks of capitalism. And Trump is one of those people. He can look at an undervalued asset and say, I can definitely build a world-class hotel here. And that's what he did in New York, right, with a few of the first hotels that he was in. He was able to get economic deals, get some favors from the city, build those particular interventions. But now when it comes to the conversation we're having, if you have countries saying that they want to, you know, remove the dollar as a reserve currency, do something else, already the shark in him is like, no, I'm not going to allow that. I'm already chasing the EU for not paying enough for what we contribute to NATO. And look at how the EU had to basically bend the knee. I've never had so many people being so complimentary and flattering to Donald Trump as when the NATO conference happened, right? So going back now to the South African context, as soon as you're pushing for these things and at the same time, you know, are in Trump's loggerheads or are in the grouping that is pushing for the reserve currency to actually stop being the dollar, Trump is not going to go head to head with everybody, but he is going to squeeze whoever he thinks is the weakest person. So when he looked at BRICS, he was like, South Africa is the weakest member of BRICS, and I'm going to squeeze them till they pop. And I think this is part of what is happening here. But if you know Trump, the history of Trump, his business transactions, his political worldview, which includes America First, etc., you have to prepare to deal with that particular administration in a different way. And I don't think that we can say to really any extent of the imagination that there was a robust effort to make sure that the Americans were stymied in their aggressive approach to dealing with South Africa.
Yeah, and you know, there's one way to characterize Donald Trump that I stumbled upon, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that is that Donald Trump is not so much a leader as he is a winner. He's all about winning. And when he views everything as a win or lose situation, there's no middle ground to him. And he will, you mentioned the dollar as the reserve currency thing. I don't think he's even necessarily looked at the economics of it. But he sees it as a win or a loss. Yeah. If something replaces the dollar, he's lost. Yeah. Not what's best for everybody. He's not that kind of guy, which makes him relatively easy to play. And you talk about the flattery, you just immediately say, Donald Trump, you've won already. And now we can talk. So, you know, those tactics make a lot of sense. With regards to South Africa, you mentioned going after South Africa because we're the weakest in BRICS. I want to put it to you, do you not think that the other BRICS countries are doing exactly the same thing to South Africa? We are the weakest in BRICS. They're getting us to do all the jobs they would love to do, but they got too much to lose. And we are so weak, we can't say no.
Well, I think that's also part of the challenge that we're dealing with, right? Is that there is this exploitation of basically the way that the global south has politically aligned itself, right? Because we said, look, Western Europe has been taking advantage of us. We need to team up as the global south to be able to improve our economies and to be able to create economic growth and opportunity for everyone. When I'm Brazil and India and China listening to you, right, I agree with you, but from my perspective, you're still the guy that I need to have, you know, buying my finished products and providing me with cheap mineral resources. So in as much as we agree in our characterization of Western Europe and the global West, etc., we are still not necessarily aligned in terms of what the strategic outcomes are going to be downstream for us as the global south. So what we're seeing is that China, India, Brazil, in different ways, are also exploiting Africa, also exploiting the weaker members in this global south. And if you were to look at the products in South African shelves, rest of African shelves, you're still not going to see a lot of benefication happening in Africa, a lot of industrialization happening in Africa, because we're in alliance with all of these nations which still understand that the economic transaction or the game is that Africa has to be at the bottom of the pyramid in order for you to be able to extract and make some value. So in as much as we agree on political talking points, we definitely don't have the same interests at heart at this particular moment in history. And because of that, I think that sometimes South Africa has played a role where we are aggravating, in terms of raising the points, the arguments, while at the same time members of BRICS are making different deals with the same America that we are also trying to castigate and scrutinize. And then the question then becomes, and this is, I think, the difficult point within the South African chat, as things stand right now, who is a better long-term ally? Is it China, or is it this BRICS formation that we're in? I mean, not China BRICS on one side, or is it with the global West or with Western Europe? Because if we say our alliance is with China, progressively, even if there's no Trump, we are going to get into the loggerheads of the Americans. Then we have to ask ourselves, if we were to abandon, Western Europe and all of these old IMF and Bretton Woods institutions for a different formulation, what does that look like down the road when we no longer have this option available to us? Right now, we are able to play both sides to a degree, right? And we are kind of enmeshed with both sides. And because of that parallel relationship, both sides have to kind of tread a little bit carefully. But as we shift further to the bloc, which is closer to China, what incentives will then remain for Europe to keep positive relationships with us? And when we are now in the block with China and they know we've got nowhere else to go, what kind of exploitation comes as a result of that? Because right now they are fair to us because we have options. What happens when you don't have options?
Yeah. There's also a worst case scenario, and I'd like to put it to you. There's one conclusion we reach. And I think that one should be very careful of making this conclusion, and that is that it may suit the narrative to think that it's China v. America, when I don't see it like that at all.
How do you see it?
I see them as having a temporary problem.
Yeah.
But they're natural kind of allies, right? And we saw that during the Cold War, where the Chinese switched sides. They switched sides willingly. They did it.
Yeah.
Right? I'm saying that this sort of thing that we keep on imagining in South Africa, that China has got some kind of problem with the US and the US has got some kind of problem with China.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I actually see them as natural trading partners, and the countries very, very, very least likely to ever go to war with one another, right?
Yeah.
They've always got bargaining chips, and they get on quite well because they see the world in pragmatic ways on both sides. So I don't understand, and I think that the South African government has bought this idea that this is some kind of Cold War 2.0, pitting these two superpowers together, where I see them having the most wonderfully mutually beneficial arrangement. Now and again, you're going to get bad behavior from both sides. So you could argue that the current impasse that you have is around China stealing intellectual property from America, right? Not the Trump thing of stealing jobs. Those jobs are never going back to America. But it's more around those kind of issues. And South Africa could get squeezed out from both sides if we're not careful.
So that would be the worst to be squeezed out on both ends.
Exactly. And that happened to many African countries during the struggle, and it happened to Zimbabwe, that were more aligned with China than they were with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And then the Chinese switched sides long before the this re-emergence of China.
Yeah.
This idea that the Chinese are natural born traders. They're a trading environment, not like Russia.
Yeah.
Russia don't understand trade, and they haven't for 1,000 years. That's why they're backward compared to the rest of Europe. But this idea that we're backing the other superpower, I think is very, very dangerous, because I've got a feeling that pretty soon, and it's good, my prediction it'll happen soon, there'll be a mega deal between the US and China. They'll go along, China will exit BRICS, and we are left holding Russia's hand.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we have to think about, and I think it's important to consider all the scenarios, right? Because if we're just thinking about, so I think, yeah, that also could happen, and I think if the American Eid is something that can subsume, because I think the big challenge within the American Republican circles, because they are the ones now who have a lot of the working class voters supporting them, the ones without the college education, is there's still that idea of when America was great and making it great again. And that may outlast Donald Trump, because the people in the Rust Belt, people in rural America will still have aspirations and memories of when these towns that they live in used to have large populations, those heydays that they hear about from their granddads. And so I take your point in that a deal could be made and that they could actually get to a position where they understand the symbiotic relationship that they have. But from an American perspective, it still seems as if there's a political appetite to regain some of that industrial capacity, and that may outlast Trump, because he's even now pushing for Apple and these other companies to bring back manufacturing. Everyone is saying it's so difficult, we can't do it. But if he continues down this road of tariffs, and he's doing it so early in his administration that I think some of it will stick. And some of the manufacturing capacity which was taken out may be brought back, right? Because they're also doing these other tariffs on, products made in Korea and other places where China has been using those as satellite manufacturing sites. So I think it is a scenario that could be possible. It would all depend, I think, on, is it 48? President 48 would probably direct.
I also think that the idea of making America great again and bringing back manufacture to America will only last until it shows that it doesn't work. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work, quite simply because those Americans that voted for Trump will say, yes, let's bring manufacture. And you say, okay, well, you go work in the steel plant, or you go put together those iPhones. And the guy says, no, that's not what I had in mind. The other guys must do it. And the other guys are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And then they're going to sort of meekly sort of withdraw from this thing. Yes, there are some things that you can do back home that were maybe exported.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be the majority of things. And I must admit, I'm completely in the camp of saying, let this experiment run its course a year or two. And you don't have to make a big noise when you sort of jettison this idea.
Yeah, and typically, when there's a policy shift, nobody wants to announce their loss. So you'll just see.
Yeah, you'll just see all the washing machines do come from China. Yeah, okay.
Fair.
Okay.
Fair. So I think it's a possibility, and we have to think from our perspective. In as much as that may be an outcome, we still need to figure out how to get back into, or how to get into a real industrialization for Africa.
Look, at the end of the day, Jamie, on this is that if you have to go and ask the Chinese to choose between the USA or South Africa, it's not going to take them long to reach a decision.
Fair.
And, we've got this idea that they, like maybe the Russians were prepared to in the past, in a totally different set of circumstances. These guys can't afford to jettison their relationship with the US or the EU. So let's see where we go. But let's take it back to South Africa. So we're going to get we're about to get the tariffs. We're probably going to get a little BRICS booster of another 10%. That seems likely to happen, especially if you put Cyril and Lula in the same room. I think those tariffs could keep on going till we run out of zeros.
Yeah, he could probably.
But so there's pressure mounting on South Africa economically, if it wasn't bad enough already. And then on top of it, we've got this situation where suddenly there's a whole lot of question marks around the criminal justice system, which was not just kicked off, but certainly brought to the surface. The pimple finally popped with General Mkhwanazi making his statement. And it sent everybody scurrying. It's possibly a bad time to be a criminal. How do you read the whole Mkhwanazi affair?
So I think that July actually was one of the most significant moments in South African history. We've not picked it up fully, but I do think that press conference on the 6th of July was something that was a junction moment, and a critical junction moment for South Africa, an inflection point, so to speak. Obviously, when you have these junctures, these inflection points, how the leadership and society responds to them will determine the outcomes of that particular moment. But I think so I think that's the first thing I want to say, is that I think it was a critical moment. The second thing I want to say is that when it comes to encountering a state, typically the public will encounter a state at three different points: at the police station, they'll encounter it at the clinic, and in a school. Those are the most frequent touch points, with the state. Obviously, you go to the Home Affairs, that's another touch point, road traffic agents, another touch point. Not every day. The places where you are most frequently likely to encounter the state is the clinic, the police station, as well as the school. And those three areas are in various levels of disarray, disrepair, mismanagement, maladministration, all of those things. But the public has always been aware of the extent of the rot within the policing system in various ways, because it is almost a well-known, whether we can call it a joke or anecdotal experience, whatever you want to say, people know that there are certain traffic offenses which can be overlooked by the police for some kind of a gift, a cool drink, if you will, right? That is commonly known. But it's also whispered that dockets go missing for a variety of reasons. And it's also commonly known...
buy something from a different store.
Yes. And it's commonly known that there are various individuals who are living very affluently. In your area, this neighborhood where we're recording, I think there's a restaurant or a street very close to here where on Sunday, all manner of luxury vehicles are parked outside that street. People are living their best lives, and many of the people who participate in that activity are the politically connected, are people who are within this tenderpreneurship space. So these things are commonly known. As well, it is commonly known that drugs are being widely used and consumed in Durban, in Joburg, in Cape Town. Once, actually, somebody approached me randomly in Durban and asked me to sell him drugs. I was like, I don't know if I look like I'm a drug dealer or whatever the case may be, but it's commonly known. And we have to be quite honest about those things. And people in certain communities are seeing the results of particular drugs on their society. So alcohol, for instance, which we also often don't speak about as a drug, has been observed as one of the things destroying the South African community. The other one that has now emerged is this drug nyaupe, which is also destroying the community, and people are seeing their loved ones on these substances, and they're also seeing the gangs fighting for control of the distribution of these substances. So it's known that there are certain neighborhoods in Joburg which are dangerous, which have these gangs which are participating in this drug industry. There are multiple books which have been written on how guns which were issued to the police find themselves in the underworld, and there are these gang families that are known in Durban, that are known in Joburg, that are known in Cape Town, and these prominent names, these names of gangs. Some of these names are always surprising. Hard Livings at some point was the name of a gang. There's a gang called Big Five in Durban or something like that. So these names, these numbers, gangs, 28s, etc., some of which have even been linked to ministers who used to be members of them, as they say. So putting that all on the table is to say the public has always been aware of all of these dynamics. But what Mkhwanazi did was to actually open the box and say to them, as a high-profile police officer, I can confirm that your experiences are not delusional. You have not gaslit yourself into thinking that you are living in some kind of a mafia state, some kind of a Colombia, Brazil, Mexico. These things are happening, and these politicians are linked to these people in these ways, and some of the people in the police are linked to the people in these ways. So I think by opening that Pandora's box, and even by sharing some of the evidence that he did share with us, which still needs to be tested and corroborated, but because some of the stuff that he was saying was so evident and plain and had been publicly reported upon, I think that he's actually shifted the political dynamics in South Africa quite a bit. The question then becomes, how deep does this rabbit hole actually go? Because if indeed there's a connection between Brown Mkhwanazi and Vusimuzi Matlala and Katiso Molefe and Senzo Mchunu, then the question becomes, is Senzo Mchunu the only senior ANC politician connected? What is that connection with Begicele? Who else was aware about all of these things? What has been happening between the criminal underworld, the political elite world, as well as these gangs and the particular communities and some senior police officers? So if this box is fully opened and ventilated, that is, I think, something that is going to fundamentally change the dynamics within the African National Congress and potentially the cabinet itself and potentially the coalition. Because let's imagine another minister falls as a result of this particular thing. How much more will it create the kind of scandal that then ends up making the president's own tenure unstable? If you recall, what led to the fall of Boris Johnson was not the birthday party in his house, but the scandal with Chris Pincher. You know, they say that he got drunk and then he started groping other men at the bar, and then it turned out that Boris Johnson had been aware of this when he had recommended the whip for him and all of those things. And then Boris denied, and then later on it became evident that Boris actually knew. And when they tried to then explain why they had initially lied, etc., the support for Boris Johnson was withering away, and that is how he lost his office as prime minister, in large part because of that domino effect, which was precipitated by the Chris Pincher scandal. So I think that was a critical moment. There are other things that happened in July. For instance, this Vodacom and Maziv merger, which now has no opposition and looks like it will go ahead. That in and of itself will restructure, I think, the world of internet connectivity, the ICT sector, in ways that I don't think we'll fully appreciate now. But that's just why I'm saying so many things happened in July outside of Mkwanazi's explosive announcement. But if you think about the ministers also who lost their jobs in that July period, I think that we are beginning to see some kind of a reshaping, still early days, but a reshaping of the future of South African politics. I would say from that 6th of July, the ground has shifted somewhat. So going now, projecting forward, I think if Parliament actually does an aggressive job with their ad hoc committee, they may actually be able to lead to some explosive findings much earlier than the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry.
Yeah. Because, I mean, the fact that you've got an ad hoc committee in Parliament that came, in effect, after the President orders a commission of inquiry, starts painting a bit of a picture. You know, you go back to the Boris Johnson scandal.
Yeah.
You know, the one of the bigger scandals of modern times was the Watergate scandal.
Yeah.
It's obviously said that it wasn't the actual crime that was the problem.
It was the cover-up,
right?
Yeah.
And nothing screams cover-up in South African sense more than commission of inquiry.
Exactly.
Right? So now, but having said that, so it looks like maybe, you know, why would the president be, rather than investigation, go the commission of inquiry route? We all know what everybody is thinking, cover-up, but it goes to Parliament. They decided an ad hoc committee, and then they elect Soviet Lt-Gen from the ANC to chair the commission.
Yeah, so I saw that and I watched it, and I had mixed feelings about it as well, because I saw what the member from, was it Action SA, raised about their concern. Yeah. So I think Malema wanted it, but he didn't have the votes, and so that's why he said he was unavailable, because he could see that the direction is already going towards. So why would he want to lose an election unnecessarily and lose face? But in as much as that is a valid concern, right? And when I looked at the composition, the ANC people brought into this particular commission. So you had Kusela Diko in there, you had the whip himself, Mtumiseni Ntuli, and then you had Soviet. I don't know who else they may have in there. But if you look at Mtumiseni Ntuli, he's somebody who's right now close to the Ramaphosa administration, somebody who's been tasked with some very critical moments. If you recall the VAT negotiations for the VAT 2.0 situation, he was the guy who was steering that particular ship. If you look at Kusela Diko, she used to be the president's spokesperson.
Yeah, till she stole money.
Till that whole scandal came out. And now she seems to be back. And she's still very close with Khumbuzo Ntshavheni, and even when she was in the political wilderness, so to speak, at some point she was working at GCIS, and you can then see the proximity because Khumbuzo Ntshavheni is part of the kitchen cabinet, and that she's one of the ministers closest to the president. So if you see Dumiseni Tuli there, you see Khusela Diko there, you then understand that the president is taking this very seriously. It's not a joke that he has those two people in that committee as opposed to maybe junior people. Those are some of his most senior trusted people in the committee. But having said all of that, so I agree that there's a perception that this will not be the fairest, most robust committee as a result of that. Having said all of that, I think what happened in the Higher Education Committee to me showed that there's still other incentives now which exist, which may counteract that attempt to try to manage the process fully. Because if you remember when the doctor came in, what's her name, Nobuhle Nkabane, right? When she came in there, Dr. Nobuhle Nkabane, being very arrogant and refusing to answer questions. At the beginning, the chairperson was trying to protect the ANC brand and any implications that may seem to be untoward in terms of how it pertained to the ANC, because she appointed Gwede Mantashe's son and several other people to these SITA board chairpersonships. Sihle Lonzi asked the question, to the Director General, did you know about this? He gets kicked out of the committee in a very dramatic fashion. And that was, I think, the committee chairperson, Tebogo Letsile, trying to act in a way that protects the party interests. However, as a result of the public reaction to the ejection, I think there was an immediate recalibration, because he was like, I'm not going to go down with this lady. If she's committed to going down, so be it. But I'm a young politician. I need to stay committee chairperson. I'm not going down with this ship. And then he then started acting in ways which maximized the committee's role. Yeah. So what I'm trying to put across is that this is going to be a panel with a lot of attention from the nation as a result of the way that Mkhwanazi introduced this topic to society, as well as the number of high-profile people that it's linked to. So even if you did want to prevent the worst outcomes for the ANC, I don't think that you can prevent any outcomes at all. There will have to be some people whose names end up on the wall and whose careers may be significantly limited as a result of what gets announced in that committee, even though they do have an ANC chairperson, because the incentives are different. The DA has got incentives there. They sent in one of their most senior strong teams, right? They have people who've worked in the NPA there. They've got serious people who are following the issues of policing more broadly. So even though it seems as if there's an attempt to try to manage it, I don't know if that attempt will be overly successful.
Yeah, look, and that's a brilliant comparison going back to what happened in higher education. The only, however, is nobody is likely to behave as stupidly as Nkabani behaved. And, the question is, they're going to come into this being very prepared, being very humble, being very contrite, and, looking like butter wouldn't melt in their mouth, not just bubble gum. So, the jury's out, and the job's for you and me, isn't it, to watch this thing so
and to
closely,
break it down for
the public, so that we don't have these people trying to tell us that a swimming pool is a fire pool, right?
And this is why there's a bit of trepidation about podcasts, because we have the availability of time, so we can say we can do a 2-hour discussion on what happened in the committee. Whereas on mainstream, they can't, because they got programming that they got to go through. So 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. I think to even get analysis of an hour on mainstream is impossible now. So that's why there's a fear. And that's why you see sometimes, the cabinet ministers being the ones who are saying podcasters are a problem. Of course, there's this other issue of podcasters who say hateful things or unresearched things, thoughtless things. There's the whole manosphere and conversations about toxic attitudes that are being taught to young boys as a result of these reckless podcasters. But I see the value of the podcast community at moments like this, because there's at least 4 or 5 names where you can think that, no, these people are going to meticulously actually look at the legal issues, the jurisprudence on this particular stuff, look at, the political science behind this, look at the game theory and the behavioral economics of all of this, and infuse all of that into analysis of what actually is being presented and not being presented in that particular commission and committee and all of that. And I think that is an important service that we provide to the public.
It definitely is. Although I don't know if Jamie provided a good service by the implication that nobody would ask me if I would sell them drugs. I'm still trying to get over that. But anyway, don't worry.
Have you ever been asked by anybody?
You see, the question comes. Thanks. I don't need your patronizing attitude. Then one of the other things that happened in our very interesting July 2025 was the announcement of the national dialogue. Right. This is. Does anybody have lipstick for this particular pig? Because I must admit, the idea of the national dialogue to me, and I put out a piece where I was not too complimentary about the national dialogue, because this thing it looks to people like you and I, and I'm not going to answer for you, you can answer for yourself, certainly looks to a person like I, the non-drug dealer, that we know what the issues are. We know what we will need to dialogue about. When basically, when you've got 50% unemployment, your kind of dialogue can end there. Is certainly my attitude. Go out and do your job. But just as we record this, the thing is busy taking on a very interesting, very interesting color. And much like we said earlier, it's maybe a bad time to be a criminal. It's maybe a bad time to be somebody out of step with the public mood. Yes.
So I think there are many criticisms of this national dialogue, but let's address the developing news so far. We've seen some major foundations pull out of this particular stage of the national dialogue, and one of them being the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. So initially, Thabo Mbeki and the foundation, one of the proponents of this particular national dialogue, saying it has value, it's going to actually make a contribution.
He kind of claimed it as his idea.
That too.
Yeah.
That too. And I think he has made various contributions to the idea of renegotiating social compacts. I think even Adam Abib wrote a book at some point about social compacts and the value and why we need social compacts going forward. So the fact that they've withdrawn at this critical point, or just before this first big event happens, I think in and of itself is damaging to the efforts to sell the national dialogue as something that is going to help solve the problems. Because it seems as if there are concerns about the management of the money, or the lack of transparency about how the money will be managed, the 700 million amount which has been cited. And to have such significant and senior leaders and foundations say we are withdrawing, I think is definitely not the way President Ramaphosa would have wanted to start August. But now let's go further than this latest development, which is definitely going to be a blow. And perhaps they may renegotiate or find a happy medium with these foundations, bring them back in. But I think the damage is already done. But going now to the public sentiment and where the public is. The public has been through a variety of discourse moments where they're like, okay, we've done so much discoursing around what's wrong with South Africa, and you don't have to now ask us again. You really have a lot of input, right? We've seen, for instance, not in the context of a discourse, but there was a discourse which flowed from that. We saw the Fees Must Fall protests in 2015, also in 2016. That led to a commission of inquiry, and that led to documents being produced, and there's a whole, I think, 700-page report that came out as a result of that. So if you're looking at it from a higher education perspective, people who were in that, which was 10 years ago now, Fees Must Fall, the first wave of the protest, you're thinking, we spoke 10 years ago. We had a whole commission. Then there were protests against gender-based violence after Uyinene's tragic killing, and there have been others. And then there was a whole gender summit, and then there was a second summit. So people may be thinking from that side of the equation, we protested. We had a women's march. We went to the summits. We gave our inputs and our suggestions. Then people are then going to say also, you have economic data you're collecting every quarter and compiling. You know what the quarterly labor force survey reports are saying. You know what the GDP data reports are saying. You know where the weaknesses are. Manufacturing is 10%. If you want to create employment, then maybe you need to increase the share of manufacturing in the economy. You want to increase the share of manufacturing in the economy, you have to improve the skills base of the workforce. Then you have to improve the TVETs. TVETs right now have a 9.2% throughput rate. There's a report out on that. You don't need to have a new conversation with the leaders of TVETs and the students at TVETs to understand that the throughput rate is 9.2%. You don't need to have a conversation with teachers to understand that the average mark in the maths exam last year was 33%. That was the average mark. The median mark was also, no, it wasn't, the average was 38, sorry, the median was 36. Average 38, median 36. And so you can already see, if the median mark is 36% out of 250,000 students who wrote that exam, you don't need to be told anything extra that, no, we have a challenge with maths education in South Africa. You don't need to look much further than the Trends in Maths and Science survey to understand that South Africa is scoring lower than what is supposed to be the adequate performance of any nation state, right? Because I think the average mark there was 380 or something like that, whereas the benchmark for poor performance is 400. So if you're scoring at 380 as an average, you're doing significantly worse than the global community who is taking part in that survey. So these are data points that currently exist. So everyone is going to be thinking, you already know. We've been telling you about potholes. We've been telling you about safety in our communities. Why do we need to spend 700 million to tell you stuff that you've spoken about in the NDP, that you've spoken about in various documents, that we've had commissions and summits, and we've also told you through how we voted, right, that we've got concerns. When you were campaigning, we told you. When you were doing door-to-doors, we told you. Why do we need to have a 700 million event? I really think it's a legacy preservation attempt by President Ramaphosa, because he views himself as the great negotiator, and to a degree, that is a fair characterization of how he played a role in critical moments, because he was one of the lead negotiators for the Constitution, and he was able to negotiate with people like Rolf Meyer and make sure that the Constitution came out vibrant, came out inclusive, came out protecting as many rights as possible. There are criticisms here and there about the Constitution, but broadly speaking, as a negotiator, President Ramaphosa can say, I successfully negotiated a good Constitution, right? His role obviously in CODESA is also documented. The business community was largely happy with how he negotiated throughout CODESA, because they came out of that process relatively unscathed, right? The National Party lost power, but big business was able to continue unaffected. But now, coming to the end of his administration, I think President Ramaphosa may feel that we came in offering New Dawn. We came in offering all of these promises. My first State of the Nation address was Tumamina, and I promised so much, and I have not yet delivered. And in fact, the economic indicators are not working in my favor. So as I leave this office, what can I do that can try to at least salvage some of the shortcomings of my administration? And he feels that if we have another CODESA 3, perhaps that will be something that then sets South Africa, maybe not immediately, but on a trajectory towards change. The problem is, from the public sentiment side of things, is that they feel like we don't want to talk anymore. We've been having these talks, and talk shops are not going to solve the problem. And to be quite honest with you, if you know that there's a shortage of maths teachers, a talk shop is not going to solve the problem. If you know that there's a shortage of doctors, a talk shop is not going to solve the problem. If you know that most of the municipalities have got high levels of corruption, they've got municipal managers who are approving, irregular expenditure, unauthorized expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. You know that people are being killed for whistleblowing when they find municipalities to have that corruption. All of these things need immediate action. They don't need another conversation, because what can we conversate that's going to stop somebody stealing from a municipality? Yeah,
and I think that before everybody goes mad on comments, you forgot one other commission to mention, one other commission that came out and
there's the Zondo,
this little one called the Zondo Commission, right?
Which cost a lot of money.
A lot of money, and there were a lot of findings, and not a lot of orange overall.
He said, quoting himself, Zondo, he said he was so, what did he say, frustrated or angry to be swearing in ministers who were implicated in corrupt activities in the same commission that he was chairing. So even from his own words, we know that Zondo himself may feel that a national dialogue is not going to help things right now.
So I suppose now with, we would have had the same discussion even if we hadn't have heard about some of the foundations and some eminent people, removing themselves at the moment from the national dialogue. Do you actually even see the thing going ahead? Because I must admit, I'm struggling to see with the mood that it even, because if you take some of the people that are involved there, it's fine if you're an old retired person, that's great, you've got time on your hands and maybe they give you a stipend. But if you've got somebody with a political future, and we know some people that may not have been with the DA before, and now she sits at the front row of the national dialogue, this is a career ender if she puts her name to this shit show, right? Do you see it actually taking off? It's
an interesting question. I think they'll go ahead with it because of the level of commitment they've already made to it. It looks as if President Ramaphosa is passionate about this. He wants to do it. He's obviously aware of some of the criticism that have been raised. I think they'll go ahead with it. But I don't think it will be very successful, because the other criteria for a successful national dialogue is that the nation has to tune in. They have to make this the talking point of the day. I think that people are going to tune in more to the Parliamentary ad hoc committee on Mkhwanazi's allegations than to any national dialogue recordings. So if we were to put national dialogue recordings on YouTube and say, here's what we said on day one, I don't think it will get even 10,000 views. But if you were to put the commission on the same YouTube and say, here's what was said on day one of the commission, maybe you get Brown Mkhwanazi as a witness there, I think that will have even 1 million views. Yes. So it may go ahead, but I think realistically there will be management of expectations in terms of the audience participation now, because they can pick up that it's not very popular, and there'll be some spinning in terms of trying to oversell what actually is achieved. But I don't necessarily think that people are right now drafting speeches that they're going to make at the national dialogue and rehearsing them because they think that that speech is going to be the game changer that finally convinces the politician to hire more maths teachers for, township schools. I don't think that's where things are at.
And of course, it's going to give podcasters like ourselves enough ammunition to lampoon the national dialogue. It's going to give us content for days, making fun of their national dialogue. So, part of me says this is the biggest wasteful exercise, but part of me is kind of excited.
The capitalist in you is like, do it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
More episodes.
We'll say nothing. It's fine. Let's do it. But there's so much we haven't discussed. It was wonderful catching up with you again, Jamie. If you think that Jamie and I should talk more regularly, let us know in the comments and I'll tell him, I'll badger him to come back here. But it's really been great to speak to you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Good, well-considered views. And to everybody that joined us today, thank you so much. Support our sponsors, Pace Car Rental. Get a discount when you book and use the SONA code. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the State of the Nation, please do so. And if you haven't checked out the dissection,
please check it out on YouTube.
Check it out. Go see what Jamie has to say there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the Stream-In team isn't filming the State of the Nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website.